Okay, welcome this morning to the House Energy Utilities Committee meeting on February 23rd. I think we need somebody, if anybody would like to make approval of the minutes. Representative Gartner, seconded by Representative Schreiber. All those in favor? All those opposed? Carried. Next item of business, we're going to open the hearing on HB 2381, establishing the State Energy Plan Task Force and develop a comprehensive energy state plan. Would Revisor Nick, are you on here? Would you give us a rundown of that, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. This is Nick Myers with the Revisor's Office. Committee, I'm going to run through the provisions of House Bill 2381, and it's basically what the bill says. So what this bill would do is it would establish the State Energy Plan Task Force, and it would charge this task force with the development of a comprehensive state energy plan. So this task force, as you can see in the bill, would be composed of 17 voting members and 8 non-voting members. And then you can read also the 17 voting members of the task force would include the chair, the vice, and the ranking minority member of this committee. And same goes for the Senate Committee on Utilities. A member appointed by the investor-owned electric utility with the largest service territory in the state. 1 member appointed by the Kansas Electric Cooperatives. 1 member appointed by Kansas Municipal Utilities, by the natural gas public utility with the largest service territory in the state. 1 by the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. 1 by Climate and Energy Project. 1 member appointed by the governor who has expertise in energy economics. 1 member appointed by Renew Kansas Biofuels Association. 1 by the Kansas Economic Development Alliance. 1 by Kansas Farm Bureau, and 1 by Kansas Advanced Power Alliance. And then the 8 non-voting members of this task force would include the chairperson of the State Corporation Commission, or a person designated by the chair, the Secretary of Commerce, including a designee, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Health and Environment, the State Geologist, the Secretary of Agriculture, and then a member appointed by the United States Department of Defense, and 1 member appointed by the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board. So what this task force would be charged to do, as I said, was develop a state energy plan that provides strategies to assess current and future energy needs, enhance energy efficiency and electric vehicle infrastructure, stimulate economic development, expand economic opportunity and workforce development, stimulate development of new and emerging energy technologies and systems, and promote diversity of energy resources while promoting affordability and protecting the environment and the state's natural resources. The bill would also require, as part of this development, for the task force to make recommendations regarding the initiation, the design, the implementation, and the evaluation of this state energy plan. And the task force would be charged with using a transparent and inclusive stakeholder process to make these recommendations. The recommendations would require the task force to consider a comprehensive perspective of the state's energy profile, including all energy resources and end-use sectors, project the future energy supply and demand and potential impacts of supply shifts, risks and uncertainties, technological changes, and then any other factors that affect short and long-term energy needs, provide a framework that allows leaders across the state to make informed decisions based on a defined and structured plan, and offer a plan of action that lays out clear recommendations and achievable goals, and also finally to propose future activities, actions, or legislation that may be necessary to ensure continued viability and long-term implementation of the state energy plan, including whether the plan should be implemented and administered by any certain state agency or division. Kind of going back to how this task force would be structured, in odd-numbered years, the chairperson of the task force would be the chair of this committee. And then while in even-numbered years, the chair of the task force would be the chair of the Senate Committee on Utilities. The staffing would be provided, specifically the State Energy Office, Division of the Kansas Corporation Commission, under the bill would be required to provide administrative assistance to this task force, including but not limited to providing a meeting facilitator, publishing meeting agendas, notices, minutes, and providing any research, data, or information requested by the task force. Additionally, staff of my office, the Office of Reviser of Statutes, Kansas Legislative Research Department, and Legislative Administrative Services would also be required to assist the task force if requested. And then if approved by the Legislative Coordinating Council, the legislative members attending the meetings of this task force could be paid amounts for expenses, mileage, and subsistence allowances. And then finally, the plan and the recommendations that are crafted by the task force would be required to be submitted on or before January 31, 2023 to the governor, to the legislature, and to both committees, both the respective committees. And Mr. Chairman and committee, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Nick? Seeing none? Okay. We'll move on to open the hearing for proponents. Representative Kessler or Representative Turner, if you'd like to move up to the seat on the host shoe. We got a lot of people testifying today. You're more than welcome to do that. And that gives a few pieces for visitors, social distancing by sitting. Okay, first one on the list, Representative Mark Schreiber. Mark, state who you're with. Well, actually, we only have one, sir. You know, the ranking minority. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Mark Schreiber with the legislature. I guess that's the best way to put it. So you've got my testimony. I'll just make 3 quick points. The first is the genesis of this legislation began in a conversation I had with the Iowa Energy Office last fall. And I was trying to determine how they went about creating their state energy plan, which went into effect 6 or 7 years ago. It was through an executive order from their Republican governor to design a plan and make it work. So he walked me through the process. I've read their plan and kind of stole bits and pieces from it that I thought might work here. So that's kind of the genesis and how it was initially outlined. The second piece is, or the second point I'd like to make is about this energy transformation transition, however you want to talk about it. Iowa talked about it quite a bit in their plan. But I think it brought it to a fine point earlier this month. Larry Fink, who is the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, wrote a letter to CEOs across the country. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. They have almost $9 trillion under advisement. And Mr. Fink writes letters to his investors, and this time he wrote it to CEOs, and basically said that if they want to create long-term value for their investors and clients, that they need to start planning on how this energy is being transformed, how it's being used differently and so forth by different industries, and be responsible for that. So I think that, for me at least, brought it to a fine point about the need for such a plan in Kansas. And third, I just want to talk a little bit about the task force membership. It's pretty clear there's probably going to be a wide, diverse array of opinions in that task force, which I think is healthy for the discussion. Also, the State Energy Office will be providing a facilitator during the meetings, which I think is also helpful to make sure it's an effective discussion and we don't get sidetracked in just opposing each other. But I think having this diverse opinion creates a stronger plan more inclusive plan, and that's why it looks the way it does right now. So thank you for the time, and there's a number of other conferees, so I'll keep my comments brief. I'll take questions now or at the end, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Representative Schreiber? Seeing none? Okay, thank you. Did you have one, Mr. Turner? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Say, I wonder, as I read your testimony, you say, like in Iowa, their theme was basically they wanted to bring new capital into the state. What do you feel like Kansas's theme is here as far as what's the unifying direction to do this?
I'm glad you brought that up because I skipped right over that. It's basically do the same thing. They called it economic development, and in fact, their energy office is in their economic development agency, which is similar to our Department of Commerce. There are a number of initiatives, and what they're starting to look at, of course, they've done a lot of renewables and biofuels, but this next technology, I guess, is going to be battery storage for them, because that will help with balancing out some of the load with their wind. They have research universities just like we do. They're hoping to attract research dollars to come in, as well as companies that might, build those battery sets or maintain them or whatever it might be. But they approached it from an economic development, not from a rate standpoint or a climate standpoint, even though those may be affected at some point with a plan. But really the key driver, and I think that's what their governor was wanting, is some way to bring capital into the state. And that's what I would hope would be the same thing for Kansas. He believes it has. It's been 6 years or so, so it's not a huge office. I think there's 6 people that kind of man that or staff that office, and they've got a lot of different priorities, and they can only do so much with the staff that they have. But they are reaching out to other outside the state kind of companies to see if they'd like to come to Iowa. I don't know what they're doing legislative as far as providing incentives, but certainly if that became part of the value creation for the state, they would certainly bring that up.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you. In the essence of time today, we have 8 conferees still. And if I figure that up right, that I'd like to give you 8 minutes apiece. That way everybody gets the same amount of time and we get everybody through here. So Vice Chair will be taking the timing. He'll notify you when you have 1 minute left. If that's okay with everybody, we'll get started with David Nickel with CURB. Dave, welcome to committee. Would you please state your name and who you're with?
Sorry about that. I'll try again. Dave Nickel, Consumer Counsel with the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, or known as CURB. For those that don't know us, CURB is a state agency formed in 1989 and became an independent state agency in 1991. And our principal statutory duty is to advocate for residential and small commercial ratepayers before the Kansas Corporation Commission, before the Kansas courts, and before this Kansas legislature. Thank you for the opportunity to address House Bill 2381. We enthusiastically support that bill, and we commend Ranking Minority Member Keither and Vice Chair Schreiber for their work in calling for a task force to develop an energy plan in Kansas. In its report to the Kansas legislature, London Economics, Inc. recommended that Kansas develop and implement a comprehensive energy plan. There are good reasons for that. We have not had an energy plan in Kansas for quite some time. And so when we develop energy policy, you may address an issue over here. You may try to address a crisis in another area, and then you may develop another energy policy to do something else. But before long, your energy policy starts to look uncoordinated, messy, and sometimes you look into it and you're not sure exactly why things are there. It starts to resemble my wife's purse. It's mystifying, and it's a little bit scary to reach into it to look for anything to help you. So we don't want that. Kansas would benefit significantly from a comprehensive energy plan. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, a comprehensive energy plan serves as the state's roadmap for meeting changing energy needs, promoting economic growth, and ensuring access to affordable, diverse, and reliable energy. The Missouri Energy Initiative in 2014 posited that by having an energy plan reviewed and tracked regularly, a state could be at the forefront of developing and securing affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy resources. The National Association of State Energy Officials, NASCIO, maintains a well-constructed state energy plan, provides an assessment of current and future energy supply and demand, examines existing energy policies, and identifies emerging energy challenges and opportunities. House Bill 2381 provides a methodological and inclusive approach to developing, through the task force, a state energy plan for the state of Kansas, which would be entirely appropriate. It sets forth an appropriate number of voting members and non-voting members and ways to assist the task force in their recommendations. It's consistent with the 10 steps that NASCIO puts forth as a model or paradigm in terms of in terms of developing an energy plan. One important goal that CURB is interested in is number 6 on the list, and it's to promote diversity of the resources that supply energy to and within Kansas while promoting affordability for consumers and protecting the environment and the state's natural resources. Affordability of energy for Kansas is extremely important. There are a substantial number of Kansans who have high energy burdens. An energy burden is the amount of your available income that you're spending towards your energy needs. Some Kansans must decide whether to keep current on their utility bills or pay for their medicine or their food. CURB believes that Kansas must do something to address this need. An energy plan will help to provide a path to promote affordability for consumers and to promote economic growth for Kansas. We enthusiastically support this bill, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee. It's always a pleasure. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, I think we'll hold all the questions until we're done. That way everybody gets a chance to do their presentation. Next on the list, Kimberly Swati. I never can say your middle. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of the Advanced Power Alliance, Kimberly, welcome to the committee. State your name and who you represent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Ginsher-Swati, and it's a pleasure to appear before you this morning. I actually am a shorter version of the person that was supposed to testify. It was supposed to be my boss, Jeff Clark, who is the executive director of the Advanced Power Alliance, which is based in Texas, and we cover 14 states. But due to the energy situation in Texas, they are hosting a forum literally right now with Conservative Energy Network of Texas. So I apologize for bringing the B team, but I do appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today. So the Advanced Power Alliance, we do represent more than 40 developers, owners, operators in the renewable energy space, including BlackRock. So the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, will speak a little bit more to his letter here in just a moment. All but 2 of the wind farms operating in Kansas and most of the other solar facilities are members of ours. We have seen what it's like to operate when there's kind of a game plan, and we've seen what it's like to operate in the state when there's not a game plan. So, for example, after the proposal of the state's second wind farm in 2004 or so, the Kansas Energy Council got together and they said, we kind of want to put a framework together around what siting might look like for wind farms in the state of Kansas. Setbacks, noise, things related to, where wind farms should or shouldn't be. And so the Kansas Energy Council deliberated for more than 18 months on what ultimately became a framework for siting of wind farms in the state. And that framework, 16 years later, still exists, and it serves as a baseline. And it is a baseline now. The industry has become more robust, and the relationships between the counties and the developers are so mature now that there is the expectation in all senses that more is being done than what was initially put forward. But that was a fantastic example of putting together a framework and really creating a nice, stable environment for investment, because the roadmap was put forth. And so, flip back actually to the executive order related to the initial Flint Hills box. So the initial Flint Hills box said, here are a dozen or so counties where you are not going to build a commercial wind farm. And that box was literally decided upon by 3 people in a room reviewing a map. And then it became an executive order. And it wiped about $16 million of sunk assets into advanced stages of wind farm development within those counties, just totally off the map. And it was interesting, at the time, there were already 3 developers that had offices located here in Kansas. They had headquarters here in Kansas. And that was also at a time when there was not a lot of investment flowing towards renewable energy assets. And so to have the equivalent of $16 million just wiped off the books by way of an executive order did absolutely create a chilling effect on the industry. And there were a lot of questions about whether or not Kansas was a stable place to do business. And it took 3 years for another wind farm to be constructed in the state. So we have an example of how things can really work, and then how things can maybe create some challenging signals. And I bring that up to you because I think it's fair to say that between 2005 and 2021, we have seen more change and evolution in the industry, in the energy industry, than anyone could have envisioned. And we are at an inflection point. And as Larry Fink said in his letter, he writes an annual letter to CEOs. He began writing this letter in 2008 at the peak of the financial crisis. And it's directed to CEOs, and he talks about what he's seeing as the world's largest manager of wealth, essentially, and investments. And for him, this year, he does, of course, talk quite a bit about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic. But I think a really important point to note for this conversation is from January to November of 2020, think about that time frame, January to November of 2020, investors in mutual funds and ETFs invested more than $288 billion globally in sustainable assets, a 96% increase over the whole of 2019. Then he goes on to talk a little bit more about, well, quite a bit more actually, it's an 8-page letter, about how the stocks within industries and just globally speaking that have an ESG profile, an environmental, social, and governance profile, are well outperforming all of their competitors, even within their own industry. So the point to that, and why I'm mentioning it, is because Representative Schreiber and the task, he spoke to it, and the task force really brings home the fact that Kansas has always been at the hub of energy policy for our nation. And we have the opportunity right now to draw a line in the sand and say, we're probably going to get a share of investment, but why would we settle for just a share of this massive energy transformation and fusion of capital? Why wouldn't we position ourselves to be a leader in it? Because that means significant more growth and jobs and capital flowing through our state. It helps drive energy innovation, and I think most Kansas taxpayers and individuals would be enthusiastic to see that sort of investment flow into our community. And so it's because of that that we stand here in support of House Bill 2381. And in 2020, Kansas Wind specifically provided 43.4% of Kansas's electric power needs. And at times, it was a little herky-jerky in how that development occurred, but it did occur. And I think it would be fantastic for, as this new energy economy comes forward, that we make sure that we're taking the greatest advantage as possible as we could. So I'm happy to stand for any questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the list, Zach Pastora, the Sierra Club. Zach, welcome to committee. Please state who you're with and what you represent.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, don't get to say this enough after all we've been through in the past year. It's really nice to see you. Great to be before you today. Zach Pastora, proud lobbyist for the Kansas chapter of Sierra Club. We have about 5,000 members across this great state of Kansas. We're dedicated to protecting and preserving the great outdoors in our state. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor of House Bill 2381 and all the hard work by the Vice Chair to bring this before the committee. We really need a comprehensive state energy plan. This is something the Kansas chapter of Sierra Club has long supported the creation of, and we're excited about the prospects of this legislation. We all know that the dynamics of energy are rapidly changing across America, and we need to position ourselves as Kansas to meet our challenges and capitalize on our opportunities. And after hearing the last conferee, totally capitalize on our opportunities. Kansas can be a leader in this energy transition, and we ought to be. We are blessed to have the natural resources to provide for renewable energy. We have the opportunity for innovation and engineering in our universities and across our work sector, so we can be at the forefront of really capitalizing on this opportunity and meeting our challenges of the day. And I just want to encourage everyone here to really pause and think about what we saw last week. And if you're like me, you may have family or friends down in Texas that have been struggling. And, you know, we ought to do this not just for ourselves, but for the country and for the world in meeting the challenges of tomorrow. We can do that. We help grow food for our country and for the world. There's no reason we can't do that with our clean energy resources and innovation. You've heard it, Kansas is one of just a handful of states that doesn't have a state energy plan on the books. We have a Kansas water plan on the books, so why not an energy plan? The London Economics also agreed that that would be a good idea. So we appreciate the bill before you and would like to see you pass that this year for economic development and environmental quality. A couple, if I may, a few ideas, food for thought to improving the bill. And I know a lot of hard work and thought's been put in the bill, but I have a couple of suggestions. One, let's move the timeline up to July 1st, 2022. Why? Because there's a few House members that'll be on that task force that may be thinking about re-election there in the fall of 2022. So let's go ahead and move it up to July 1st. Let's get the business done. You'll remember that the Transportation Vision Task Force had 12 meetings in a span of 7 months. I think this group could do more or less the same in a year's time. You may want to add a few more stakeholders. I know it's you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen per se, but there's a number of regular energy stakeholders that go before the Kansas Corporation Commission, go before you and the Senate Utilities Committee, talking about energy policy regularly. I noticed a few names that are missing from that group, and so I just would encourage you to consider broadening a little bit of the stakeholder group. And why? Because of cohesion. I think if you have everybody have a seat at the table with a vote, you can have cohesion, and there'll be a mutual sentiment to move forward with these policies. Those would be the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group, often testifies before this committee and as well as before the KCC, AARP for the seniors, the Kansas Chapter Sierra Club, yours truly, be happy to serve on the group, especially because we have a full breadth of environmental issues, water, climate, agriculture, everything that deals with environment, wildlife, we have a concern with. And we also think that it would be helpful to have a curb to be a voting member. I think they're currently slated as a non-voting member, but because they are standing up for our residential customers and small businesses, it might be important for rate impacts to have them as a voting member. So with that, that'll be my testimony. I appreciate any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I want to apologize to Ms. Swati. I had checked you off and I looked and I go, oh, there's Kimberly again. So I checked you off. So you have 2 in a row. Would you like to come back up and do your second presentation for the Kansas municipalities?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I apologize. The Advanced Power Alliance was supposed to be my boss, Jeff, but I apologize. This time I am here speaking before you on behalf of Kansas Municipal Utilities, but as well on your testimony, you should see a listing of the state's electric and natural gas providers. So I am also speaking on their behalf and hope to do them justice in my comments ahead. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. House Bill 2381 would create the Kansas State Energy Plan Task Force, and it would be given the mission of developing a comprehensive forward-looking energy policy to promote quality of life, advance economic growth, and support service and reliability. While not getting into a full discussion of what transpired during the recent winter storm and the associated prolonged Arctic blast, which stretched deep down into Texas, the role of the power grid and the natural gas infrastructure system is top of mind for many customers, of course, businesses and policymakers. Kansas joined the Southwest Power Pool in 2004, and since then, we have been investing in the safety and reliability of our transmission grid. And it was through these well-studied and affirmed cost savings project that the SPP grid performed so well during the historic 100-year event with only 2 modest load reduction measures. There's always, of course, a fine and delicate balance in energy infrastructure investment, particularly after this recent event. Most, however, would agree that investments in maintaining the reliability and safety of our natural gas pipes, transport pipes, wellheads, transmission systems, electric distribution systems, generation assets is of tantamount importance to provide safe, reliable, and affordable service on a daily basis and to be able to weather the most rugged weather events. The Energy Plan Task Force will help ensure that the investment framework protecting the integrity of the entire energy system is maintained while keeping pricing affordable for customers. So 2381 suggests a forward-looking approach rather than another expensive historical approach, and the task force does include a diverse set of voices with legislators that can hold all stakeholders accountable to ensure that the solutions offered are truly in the best interest of all Kansas ratepayers. So we know that 2381 is an initial step to creating a comprehensive energy plan, something our state's not had in almost a decade when the KEC was disbanded in 2010. On June 1 of 2004, the Kansas Energy Council was formed and charged with formulating a coordinated and comprehensive state energy plan and making recommendations to the governor on the plan itself. And my boss, the executive director, Colin Hansen, actually chaired the Energy Council for several years. And the mission of the Energy Council focused on that the KEC should study trends in production, demand, distribution, and technology and economics that impact Kansans, and then try and envision the future. And then with that future in mind, make recommendations for policy, tax, regulatory incentives needed to facilitate future investments. So at that time, also, Kansas legislators and policymakers were very concerned that the state had lost our status as a net exporter of energy. We had always been an exporter of energy, and we lost that status in the mid-90s, and the KEC was tasked with aggressively seeking how to reclaim that. And so through a series of meetings over the course of many, many years, they created reports and tools that did actually benefit the state, one of which I alluded to already, which was that wind energy siting guideline. The Energy Council was also a diverse group of stakeholders, but at times perhaps too diverse. That's another benefit of 2381, is that it is a more limited group. And because of the diversity of that initial Kansas Energy Council, we do think that perhaps some of the accomplishments of that organization was in fact limited. But in the 11 years since the Kansas Energy Council was disbanded, there has not been another entity that has begun to pick up the mission of the KEC, which was a deliberative forum with legislative input to seek to ensure that Kansas energy policy had an encompassing look. So HB 2381 is a positive step. And I stand ready to answer any questions at any time, but do encourage your support of House Bill 2381, again, on behalf of the listed utilities above. Thank you.
Thank you again, and I apologize for taking you off that second time. Next up is Rabbi Monty Reber, Kansas Interfaith Action. Be virtual. Are you there, Monty?
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Rabbi Moti Reber. I'm the Executive Director of Kansas Interfaith Action. We're a statewide multi-faith issue advocacy organization that puts faith into action on a variety of social, economic, and climate justice issues, and I'm here to speak in favor of HB 2381. The congregations, the denominations, and the people of faith who make up Kansas Interfaith Action view human-caused climate disruption not solely as a matter of science, but as a deeply moral issue as well. That is because, first of all, of its impact on God's creation, which is sacred in its own right, but also because the burning of fossil fuels is already having effects that are felt first and worst by the most disadvantaged in our society, Black and brown people, working people, and poor people. If you think this is an exaggeration or a far future prospect, look at the events in Texas over the past week to see the cost in money and in human lives of ignoring human-caused climate disruption. Kansas, too, is facing extremes caused or exacerbated by climate change. I'd like to speak more about this at some point, but the longer we put off dealing with this issue, the worse it becomes. We basically have no climate policy in Kansas and no way to make any. I've had a badge since 2012, and there has, in all that time, there has never been a hearing in front of a duly constituted committee that talked about climate disruption from a realistic point of view. There's two things we need to focus on. First is a rapid decarbonization of our economy, transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards sustainable sources of energy in the building, transportation, and agriculture sectors. And second, building resilience into our system so that Kansans are protected from the worst consequences of climate disruption. Again, there are many suggestions I could make in both of these measures. Unfortunately, we never have a committee hearing designated for that. One area where Kansas has done well is in the development of wind energy, which currently provides 41% of our utility level power in Kansas. One area where we haven't done so well is in solar energy, where despite having a top 10 solar resource, interference from the monopoly utility is keeping us from fully utilizing it. This is exactly the kind of thing that should be discussed by an energy task force. So two of our major priorities of Kansas Interfaith Action's major priorities over the past couple of years have been development of a state energy plan, where we can plan the equitable and rapid transition to a clean energy economy. And second, the development of a state climate plan, which would plan for Kansas's climate disrupted future. This bill would begin to address the first of these priorities. We supported Governor Kelly's ERO last year because we wanted to get the policy underway. But with that option having been rejected, this is the next best thing. We are supportive of this task force because we think, as the consultants did, that the Kansas needs a state energy plan and that this is the way to get there. However, I have two areas of concern which I'd like to raise. One is that I would like it better if the bill had the word climate in it. I would certainly like that to be one of the criteria upon which we would make energy decisions going forward. I think it's sort of stuffed in there as, sort of other factors, but I would really love an explicit commitment to taking climate into account as we plan our energy future. That's the first one. And then the second one, my colleague and friend Zach Pastora mentioned, which would be expanding the stakeholders. I'm a little concerned. There seems to be a lot of energy interest on the committee and not that many public interests. Not enough public interest stakeholders. I'm concerned that with such a large representation from fossil fuel interests and also several members of the commission of the task force are explicit climate deniers, that the conversation would be stacked towards an all of the above energy conversation that we've had for far too long in Kansas, which prevents us from moving strongly in the direction of a full commitment to clean energy and away from fossil fuels. Mr. Chairman, human-caused climate disruption is the most profound moral challenge of our time, one that we have not yet even begun to wrestle with. I dedicated much of the past 10 years to organizing and advocating for Kansas to begin to address this issue with the seriousness that it requires. HB 2381 is a very significant beginning in that process. It is just a beginning, but it is an important bill. That's why we support it. I ask the committee to pass it favorably onto the full House for passage. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll take any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jessica Lucas on behalf of the Clean Energy Business Council. Jessica, welcome to the committee. State your name and who you represent, please.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, committee. I am Jessica Lucas, and I'm here today. I am the lobbyist for the Clean Energy Business Council, and here today on behalf of the Climate and Energy Project, which is our founding organization. The Climate and Energy Project has been a strong advocate for renewable energy and energy efficiency since 2007, and certainly has seen a lot of change in that sector since its inception. That's in part why we created the Clean Energy Business Council, because there is such a strong business case to make for investments in energy efficiency, distributed generation, and even transportation. It is not a surprise that I would be up here asking for your support for a state energy plan bill. You have heard me testify, not just this year, but in past years, about how desperately we could benefit from an energy plan. I think some of my colleagues behind me often roll their eyes because they know as we talk about energy issues, I am always the first to say, this needs an energy plan. We really, really need an energy plan. While there are certainly divergent viewpoints on the topic, there is a lot of similarity. And even though there are differences, I do believe that the folks standing behind me, we all recognize that the energy future is rapidly changing, whether we like it or not. And we want to be able to work together to forge what that path looks like. And I think what has been challenging for us is that we haven't had this plan. And so you guys are making decisions a lot of times in a silo. We had an incredibly robust discussion about electric vehicle charging stations in the Senate committee, and some people joke that it was like a transportation hearing, but happening in a utilities committee. That's because all of these issues are intersecting in so many different lanes. And so I feel that it only makes the most sense for all of you that we are working together at the same table, talking through this very big issue and finding common ground. We certainly would encourage, I know Zach had suggested an earlier completion date, and the benefit that I see to completing this plan by July of 2022 is that it gives us then that next 6 months to work on legislative language. And so I get a little concerned if we aren't really reporting out our findings until January 31 of 2023, just because of the nature of how things work here. And yes, there is a lot of work that can be done in advance, but as a report goes, let's get it done in July, do the heavy lifting. We all know it needs to be done. And then that gives us a good runway to come back in 2023 and really start implementing the ideas and solutions that we have collectively found together. I will also note that in regard to Iowa, one of the benefits that their energy plan provided for them was their ability to leverage federal resources for research and development and some pilot projects that they could test for new industry opportunities. So there are a lot of advantages that an energy plan provides, even just in terms of making the case to the feds about what we're doing here and how they can help augment any of the work we're doing. And lastly, I would just say we know that, again, to that business case, that there are a lot of differences between how operations work and opportunities available in the energy sector on the Missouri side versus Kansas. We see that very clearly because there's a lot happening at the border. And folks on the Missouri side have more tools available to them today, both in regard to distributed generation and energy efficiency. We'd like to see a level playing field and think that an energy plan is a great way to bring all of that information forward and talk through what does work best for Kansas. So very, very pleased to see this legislation, appreciate all the work that's gone into it, would make the suggestion that we just speed it up a little bit so we can get started on the solutions even more quickly and expediently, and look forward to your support and continued conversation.
Thank you. Next up, Randy Stuckey with the Kansas Renewable Biofuels Association. Randy, welcome to committee. State your name and who you represent, please.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Randy Stuckey, and this morning I represent the Renew Kansas Biofuels Association, and you do have my written testimony. We stand in support of this bill and appreciate being given a seat on the task force. The Renew Kansas Biofuels Association is the voice, the statewide Biofuels Association in Kansas. That includes ethanol and biodiesel and renewable diesel processing facilities located across state. Biofuels are important to our industry. They're important to the Kansas consumer. They're important to the ag industry, ag economy, and the Kansas economy. And for that reason, we appreciate being included in this conversation. We have two interests specifically in this bill. One being users of energy. We've come before this committee and the Senate committee for the last few years now and talked about the impacts of high electricity costs on our industry. We're high users of electricity. And for that reason, as an input, the high costs of energy in Kansas they're almost cost prohibitive to the point where we have multiple facilities that have already moved to cogeneration. That's where you generate energy on site, enough for your industrial needs. And if you have surplus, you sell it back to the line. That's where we are. We've moved to the place where we can no longer competitively purchase energy off the grid and move it to cogeneration. So that's the first point, that the cost of energy, the high cost of energy, are an issue that needs to be delved into, hopefully through this task force. Our second point is that we produce energy. We produce energy in the form of mobile energy. And it's to that point that I reached out to the vice chair, and one of the strategic objectives of this task force is to enhance infrastructure for electric vehicles. Now, transparently, electronic vehicles are direct competition to the liquid mobile fuels for cars, but that's not our issue. Our issue is that the current language, and I'll point you to the section of the bill. It's section 1, subparagraph B2, and it states that the strategic objective is to enhance energy efficiency and electric vehicle infrastructure. Not a problem with that. We would just ask that if the bill has worked, that specific language be amended and broadened to be more contextual to all mobile units of energy. So in our testimony, we do have some proposed language, and essentially it would just say, in addition to what's currently there, B12 would read, to enhance energy efficiency and plan for electric vehicle infrastructure as part of a comprehensive strategy for vehicle fueling infrastructure that includes biofuels, alternative fuels, and even petroleum fuels. So we would, if the bill has worked, we hope that it will be, we would ask that language would be amended into that specific portion to put EV infrastructure in a broader context of liquid biofuels that are important to our industry, but the Kansas economy as a whole. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. Certainly would stand for any questions.
We do have a little time here, so before we go to the written only, which is, I go ahead and cover them, I guess. John Donnelly with Kansas Farm Bureau, Leslie Coughlin with the Kansas Electric Co-ops, Emily Wolf, Kelly Gilbert, Metropolitan Energy Center, and Mallory Lutz with Little Government Relations. Go back to the proponents that were here. Is there any questions from the committee to any of the opponents? Or proponents, I'm sorry. Seeing none? Okay, we'll close the proponent section of the hearing. Open the hearing on opponents. First up is Paul Snyder on behalf of the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group and the Kansas for Lower Electric Rates. Paul, welcome to the committee. State who you're with and your name, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Paul Snyder. I'm here this morning representing Kansas Industrial Consumers Group and Kansas for Lower Electric Rates. So you heard a lot of very positive testimony. It's not often that, in fact, this may be the only time I can remember that I've gotten up as the single opponent of a bill that had, I think you mentioned maybe 12 or 13 proponents, including the esteemed vice chair of this committee. So I listened through all the testimony, and I'm not quite prepared to switch my testimony, so I'm going to go ahead and with what I have. But thank you. You know, our opposition to this covers a couple different areas. As you all know, our core focus is trying to make sure that Kansas has competitive electric rates. That in no way is spelled out in this bill, and I think that needs to be an important focus if it moves forward. But importantly, I think this bill has the potential to take us the other way. What's going to happen as people get together and talk, what it's going to do is build a roadmap for investments that Kansas needs. And that translates into a green light for utilities to spend more money to make sure those investments come to fruition. So all that is paid by Kansas consumers. It's really unclear what we're trying to do with this plan. As I said, it doesn't really address competitive electric rates, which was the focus of the study that's referenced in the resolution part is kind of hinged on. But away from that, absent the state looking at how to lower electric rates, we're actually well down the path of energy transformation in Kansas. As you heard from Kimberly and others, Kansas is already a leader, I believe the top 3 in wind production. Our utilities have already been using wind energy, dating back to 2006, I think, was the first use of wind energy in Kansas, and some utilities have continued to invest and will continue to invest in that. Our utilities are already experimenting with battery storage. As you've heard before, we have no shortage of folks interested in investing in transmission. We've got utilities already using utility scale solar. There's a 0.5 gigawatt or 500 megawatt solar plant that's under construction, or at least under consideration, in Gardner, Kansas. That is massive and going to open up the door to more solar in Kansas, and I think that's a good thing. All of our utilities have experience with coal and natural gas and nuclear. Some of our utilities have been using contracting for hydroelectric power for years. So they have experience with non-carbon sources of energy. Our utilities and Kansas regulators fully understand right now, today, that the benefits that energy efficiency can bring to Kansas. Some utilities that operate in other states, like Evergy, have that built into their IRPs, so they know exactly what and how to do that. Our utilities understand how to create shareholder value. That's been proven time and time again. And then also, all of our utilities, particularly our biggest one, Evergy, has ample, if not outstanding, experience with electrical vehicles and charging things that need to be done. They've talked at national conferences on the right thing to do. In summation, where is it that we aren't at right now? We've got the pieces in place. Again, our concern is that if we move forward with this plan, number one, it's going to take nearly 2 years of time and resources and attention. And then while we're doing that, it naturally stalls out other conversations that you're going to have in this building. Everyone's going to be like, well, you can't do that. We've got an energy plan underway. We have to see what that says. So that's a real consideration that I think everyone needs to look at. And I also want to point, some of the conferees here think that this will be a panacea for any ills that the legislature hasn't been willing to do, or utilities haven't found a way to do. Don't deceive yourselves into thinking that if this goes forward and an energy plan says, for instance, we ought to have more rooftop solar. Don't think that just because an energy plan says it, that the utilities here in this room are going to say, that's a good idea. The energy plan says to do that. We ought to reform our net metering rules and make that, better for consumers. It's just not going to happen that way. I think, some people are also looking for a voice. Our utilities are run by very smart people, and energy interests like Kimberly's group, very smart people. If they want something, but they know how to reach you, that they don't need an energy plan to supplement what they're trying to do. So in summary, I would just urge you to, think cautiously about what you're really trying to get, because I think we've already gotten down the path toward energy transformation, and would ask you to slow down and really think about what we're trying to achieve here. So with that, appreciate your time, and I will be happy to stand for any questions.
you. Anybody have any questions? Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Just maybe a comment and a question. We paid how much money for London economic study that I think one of their high priorities was to establish an energy plan from that study, if I remember correctly, reading it. And I guess then so that's what this is doing, this task force. Then I guess my question revolves around your comment about reducing utility cost for consumers. Have you done any analysis of other states? For example, Iowa was referenced, of states that have implemented energy plans and then what happened to utility cost after those plans had been implemented for a period of time?
I have not done that type of research in particular. You do reference Iowa, and I will, note that Iowa has generally lower electric rates than Kansas. I don't know that there's a correlation. As you know from the, how utilities work, utility rates increase when they spend money. So again, that goes back to our core concern is if we're creating a roadmap for them to spend more money, generally that's going to translate into higher rates.
Okay, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. That might be something that we could look at down the road, or at least is there a comparison energy plan to reduction in rates?
Very good question. Representative Schreiber. Representative Delberdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here. As we went through this and we listened to the various people that have testified already, but I'm curious.
Can you speak into your mic? So
I'm sorry. Do you know, or would you have any comments or opinions on how this bill or plan works in conjunction with the Southwest Power Pool? Is the pool not already diversified? I mean, this thing's spread over many states. It isn't just Kansas providing power to Kansas only. And I would also like to, I don't know if anybody in here we heard the rabbi make the comment that wind accounted for, I think he said 40% of the power generation here. How much of that 40% is actually used in Kansas versus generated here? And if the power pool is not diversified already, then what are the ramifications there? I don't know if you'd have any comments on any of that.
So I will offer what I can. So as the representative mentioned, of course, Kansas is part of the SPP, the Southwest Power Pool. I believe that's a 14-state region. And several years ago, we went to join. It used to be that SPP just ran the transmission grid. And several years ago, they transitioned to running the generation and dispatching on the grid, or at least making sure that those the energy supplied was what was needed. I don't know that the SPP particularly has goals or strategies. I'm sure they have some general parameters for the diversity that they want on the grid. The grid has become diversified mostly by the nature of adding as much wind energy as we have. There's obviously significant wind in Kansas, but also Oklahoma, parts of Texas that are part of the SPP, and then up in the Dakotas as well. So I think just the nature of adding all that wind has diversified. And then some utilities certainly have more aggressively invested in gas generation. That's also added to diversify it. So I guess I'm not up to speed necessarily whether the SPP has specific mandated goals for diversity, or it's happened over time, or just kind of an organic growth, if you will. And as it relates to this plan, I would need to look at it again. I don't recall this plan would necessarily look at the SPP and whether that continues to be a good fit for Kansas. I'm not saying it is or isn't. Perhaps maybe it should look at transmission, which can easily get into a very, very complex, complicated question very easily.
Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Paul. appreciate the esteemed adjective. I did want to point out, though, I think you mentioned that the first commercial wind was in mid-2000s. I think you mentioned.
I think
or
I
said
said
something like
around
it.
2006. I'm not quite certain. I know
Not to-
KCPL's was in 2007 and 8,
Yeah.
but there was the precursor one that went to Aquila before that in Gray County.
And before that, the first two wind turbines were in the late 90s at Jeffrey Energy Center.
How about that? I like to set you up with these softballs.
Boy, call me esteemed and then throw me softballs. This is great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you touched a little bit on what the current planning function is in terms of how utilities match available supply or will in the future. I think you mentioned an IRP. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, how that comes together and what its purpose is and how does it relate to the cost of service mixing the various sources to come up with a low-cost supply to meet demand.
Sure, I'll be happy to. An IRP is an integrated resource plan. It's a common tool in most states where you look at over a long time horizon, both little chunks, more of a near-term time horizon, and then a longer, much longer 20, 30, 40, 50-year time horizon, and they're updated periodically, usually every 2 to 3 to 4 years. Kansas did not have and currently still does not in statute have an IRP requirement, a little bit of an outlier from that perspective. However, at least some of our utilities that operate in other states would generally provide the KCC with the IRPs that they did in other states and had somewhat of a process. During the merger to create Evergy, there was a plan worked out with the KCC to kind of do a KCC specific, as opposed to coming in legislation and mandating it. The KCC and the parties agreed to set up an IRP process. In that, I don't believe anything has been filed yet. I might need to rely on Curb or someone else. I believe they're going to be filing something in the next 6 months, which would really be the first IRP for Kansas, with regard to Evergy at least.
Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
You supported Senate Bill 69, did you not?
Yes, we were the lead proponent on that.
Uh-huh. And as Representative Gardner has mentioned, one of their top priorities when they made the recommendation was to come back and create an energy plan. So you're standing up against one of the recommendations of the bill that you so highly supported. And the integrated resource plan, I also believe, was one of their top, along with securitization. I think those were really sort of the top three out of the bill. So I'm sort of curious that you supported the bill and don't like what they came back with a report. I mean, this gives an opportunity for everybody to come to the table at some time or another and participate. And so I can't see how this could be harmful.
Well, I appreciate the comments there, and without a doubt, we did support that bill, and there were a lot of things in that. We've tried to bring some of those ideas back to this committee. One of those was House Bill 2080 dealing with transmission charges. The report just referenced said very specifically the transmission charges in Kansas are out of control, is my terminology, not theirs, but they definitely suggested maybe some things should be looked at. That Kansas has too many surcharges that are tilting the regulatory balance toward utilities. So we've tried to surface those issues, and so certainly there's, in totality, we definitely agree with the rate studies, but there are certain things within that. And as we communicated when we asked for it, we didn't have a preconceived notion of what would come out of that. We thought it would be instructive. We do think it has been instructive for Kansas to build a pathway to regionally competitive rates. And we're just now starting the process of looking at that. And I think it's, I'm safe to say that there is no direct correlation that I've seen at least, and this gets to Representative Gardner's question, that I have not seen a correlation between energy plans and reduced rates. In fact, this talks about affordable rates. Affordable rates is a different conversation than regionally competitive rates. You know, I can afford to get a $1,000 bill. I'm not going to go bankrupt by that. I certainly don't want that, but I could afford that. That's different than having a bill that is competitive.
Well, I appreciate those remarks. Were you referring to Senate Bill 280 from last session?
No, I was referring to the transmission delivery charge bill. I believe it was 2180.
Oh,
I don't remember what 280 from last year was.
well, I do. Thank you, Paul. And if I can, Mr. Chair, I think one of the things that we did so well over the course of the years and have maybe lost a little ground is that we were a member, we created the Kansas Energy Transmission Organization. So we were down with the SPP and having a say in getting programs and transmission lines built here in Kansas. So that's one of the reasons we have a sustainable grid at this point. Just for the committee information, that don't know that PowerPool has a 10-year plan and a 20-year plan that they follow. So they aren't doing things just here or here, there, anywhere. They've got solid plans that they put forward and follow very carefully. So thank you, Paul, for your information, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were you referring to the KETA, Representative Keither?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Representative Berkowitz, did you have a question? Okay. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this isn't directly to you, Paul, but I just wanted to be sure people understood that with the plans that I looked at, they don't get into mandating or setting up a bunch of requirements for utilities or use of certain fuels or so forth. What they try to do, and I'll go back to when I responded to Representative Turner, is their goal is to is trying to create long-term value in that state. I know we've talked a lot about electricity, and that's really important, but we also have a transportation network that is changing, and we have a lot of major industries in the state that you know, maybe there's ways to encourage them to be part of this transition. Department of Defense has transportation goals for you know, countrywide, and drawing a blank now on the other industries, but there are just it's not just electricity, it's not just natural gas. Certainly there are things that the state can probably help with that, but it's not the plans that I've seen. Iowa's, and I'll use Iowa as an example, they didn't come out with a list of mandates or requirements for their utilities or producers. It was more trying to allow the state to be part of the process to encourage capital and investment in the state. So just wanted to make that clear that it wasn't a directive from the plan down to businesses or individuals. So, thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Gardner.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've been on this committee, I guess, 5 years now, and we've been talking about an energy plan off and on those 5 years. So with that, I would just, I want to commend Vice Chair Schreiber and Ranking Minority Keither on putting this bill together. I believe it's the first step in really having all participants, most participants come together and develop a really, really dynamic energy plan for the state of Kansas. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh. Yeah, I do.
Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would also like to say that we had a great example in front of us when we put the task force together for broadband, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. You know, people, everybody wants a seat at the table, and boy, we would love to have everybody as voting members at the seat of the table. But you know, you get too big, and then it gets complicated. But what the thought here is, just like we did with the task force with broadband, bring people, everybody together, have separate discussions that we bring back to the main committee, bring people in from all over the state, and or we go to places in the state. I don't know how we figure that out yet, but we had an example of how good policy can go forward with so much input when we did the broadband task force. So we have an example already of how a recent example already of how well this can work, and I think it's definitely time overdue. And but we certainly have an example of how to make things work. So I just wanted to say that and would like to see this bill go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments. They were very good ones. You know, and there was, I think it's a pretty good mixture of everything. There was one comment made by one of the conferees that it was being loaded with energy companies and legislators on different sides of the fence. But if we stack it all with one side, then we completely did the wrong thing, because then it's going to be cut and dried. So I think it needs to be a diverse of all of them and not select few. And if you don't like their position, you want them off of there. So anyway, with that being said, any other questions? I had one for the previous speaker, if he wouldn't mind again. This is kind of a comment too.
Sir.
You know, I've been on the Energy Committee since I started 13 years ago and worked. My question is, maybe since you brought up a lot of good points in your testimony here, and I was really liked them, some of them. We've got more generation today than we did in 2008 when I came in. And we got a lot more generation of all different diversity types that everybody's saying they want in this, you know, commission study. If we have more generation than we ever had, we've had all different types of generation, everything. We have more transmission than we did. Why did we have a failure during the worst time of weather? What was the cause of that failure?
That's a great question.
Would you care to comment on it, or would you rather
quite
not?
prepared to delve into. I do think, so I believe the governor has already called for some investigations. No doubt, you know, this committee or the Senate Utilities Committee may want to, you know, have certain things you want to look at. I think if you look at the supply and demand reports that the KCC puts out, the state, particularly our IOUs, should have had plenty of generation available to them to call upon. I honestly, right now today, do not know how much of the blackouts were more caused by SPP. Even if we did have enough, it was going to other places and still needed to draw down. And I don't know if Laura would have more information, but that's about the extent of what I know.
Okay, and thank you. I agree with you. Maybe part of this task force could address why, when we got more generation than we ever had, trying to keep the rates down to people, we had the biggest failure when we needed it the most for the poor people that can't afford electricity. That's my question. Maybe that's one thing this task force could figure out what happened here. Thank you. Any other further questions? Seeing none, we'll move to neutral opponents. And there was none. Is fiscal note. Nick, would there be a possibility, would you have a basic fiscal note, would you know of, or is there none available? It's on there? Okay. I can see it there. Sorry. With that, we'll close the hearing on, what's the number here? 2381. Thank you. Committee, I think this is the last meeting we've had as far as we're going to have work a bill or hearing on a bill. Thursday, we plan on working some bills that we previously heard. And so if you have any questions, please try to be here so you can vote, so we can get them moved out to the floor. Also, in closing, I want to thank everybody for all their help this year and everything we've done. And I also have some snacks for you again. They're not the delicious cinnamon rolls we've had in the past, you know, but they're deer sticks, deer salami, and I still have a few choice pieces of mountain lion salamis with cheese and crackers in my office, if you would care to say that you had some. You're welcome to come down. With that, Representative
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that the rule in your committee is the same as in all the other committees I'm on, that members can vote on bills that are being worked from their offices so as not to be in the room with people who obviously don't think it's important to wear masks.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can work in your office if you want to, as long as you're in the Capitol.
That's just why I want to make sure that we can vote from our offices. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, with that being said, I've got my shot, so I shouldn't need a mask according to that. So thank you.
I'm not, Mr. Chairman, I'm not at all speaking of you because you're presiding
We're
over
not-
the meeting.
we're not
I'm
gonna
talking
argue
the
about-
people in the back.
You're out of order. We're not going to argue about masks in this committee. There was another question over here. Representative Gartner.
Just, Mr. Chairman, a question. On the bills that we might possibly work on Thursday, will that be publicized? Will we be sent a memo or letting us know what bills you do plan to work?
Yeah, we're going to try to get them all out within the next day or so. You all know, okay? Any questions? Okay. Representative Gartner or Schreiber? Carmichael, do you still have a comment? Your hand is up.
No, Mr. Chairman, I apologize, and I certainly didn't mean to get into a fight over masks. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't either, but I hadn't had a chance to gavel you down yet this term, so.
Oh, well, I can always give you that opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Would you like for me to continue to talk? Just hammer me down. Thank you.
There you go. Okay, we are adjourned.